ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Vilnius Technical University. Welcome to the Faculty of Creative Industries at this university. And I am Vytis Valatka, a professor of this faculty. And today we will have a meeting, the interview with our special guest, Professor Joe Pilotta. Yes. So, first of all, let me just say some words about Professor. So, he is a very famous professor, academician, also researcher, and very good man. As in Latin, vir bonus, pulchrus, et eruditus. So, during his academic career, he published more than 30 monographs, more than 300 articles. Also, he just participated and read the papers in about, if I'm not mistaken, 500 various conferences. So, he is a well-known theorist, practitioner, researcher, and expert in this broad field of communication. And maybe let us start from some a little bit personal question about you and Lithuania.
Oh, okay.
About you and Lithuania, because as far as I know, maybe I can just be wrong. But as far as I remember, it was about 10 or 11 years ago that you visited Lithuania for the first time, because first time I saw you in this book fair in Vilnius.
Yeah.
Yes, and since that time you, I think, just almost became this regular resident of Lithuania, because you have visited Lithuania. You are visiting Lithuania once or twice, or sometimes even for 3 times per year. So what are the ways which led you to Lithuania, and what is the reason of this special love for Lithuania?
Yeah, well, that is a good question, nor did I expect that question. I did start coming here 10 years ago. It was in 2012. I was invited actually here to participate in a conference that Professor August Mokunis was involved, and he said, "Joe, why don't you come to Lithuania and do a paper?" And I even forget what the paper was about. And I said, "Gee, that'd be interesting." Certainly, I had never been to Lithuania. I didn't ever really put that on the list of where I'm going to go. In fact, I knew August was Lithuanian, and I've known that for a long time, and I knew where Lithuania is and all that. So, but I said, "Gee, this would be an interesting opportunity to see it." I came. The first thing I saw was the actual old world charm of Vilnius. Even though probably from a number of people who live here, they say what's become quite modern. For me, it was the old town, walking through the brick streets, walking up different side streets of Vilnius, that sort of endeared me to that old world charm, and how that this place hopefully would not lose that uniqueness by becoming a metropolitan city like every other one, where you'd have pizza parlors on every corner of the street. And then you would have a Kentucky Fried Chicken on the other corners. But nevertheless, I've seen that you've been able to keep that down in Vilnius. And then second, and a close second, I did enjoy the people very much. I found that the students here in Lithuania, which were actually, I'm not so overly saying smarter than the ones I taught in the United States, but I would say much more eager to learn, much more interested in learning, um, were more here because they wanted to or they felt a need to, where many times in the university where I taught, students came just because they were expected to. And the faster they could get through 4 years of college, the better, and they had no real purpose for being there, which I found quite the opposite here. So I started coming because I was invited. And it's always nice to be invited to places that people want to see you and maybe want to hear what you have to say, whether they take it all in or whether they leave some behind or they say forget it. It's always nice to be able to talk to people and let them know what you're studying, what the world as you see it is about. And so I kept on coming, and I continue to keep on coming as long as people have me. At the same time, I developed kind of a love affair with Lithuania, probably Vilnius in particular. And it is kind of a home away from home, strangely enough. I've spent now not as much time, but almost as much time as I did in China. And at one time, China was my home away from home, but this has become kind of that place. So in general, the love, and of course, the love affair extends to the people, the city, and the students who I see. So that's my fascination with Lithuania and specifically Vilnius.
For this wonderful answer. And now let us have more professional question, maybe.
I hope that was the hardest question.
So you are well-known theorist, practitioner, expert in communication. But communication is a very broad area, quite a thick forest, let us say. So what are your specific focuses or fields of interest in this dense forest?
Well, my interests in the field of communication are actually varied if you take it within the field. And maybe the world at large, the field of communication gets very expansive. When I started in the field of communication, I was not in communication. I actually had just come out of a degree in sociology. But one of the great respected theorists that I enjoyed when I studied sociology was Niklas Luhmann from the University of Bielefeld in Germany, and who basically all of sociology is communication. And so falling into that realm of sociology, but that's not the only part. The only second part of it, and maybe just as much, is most people don't know that with Niklas Luhmann, his foundations of his theory of society is actually based on Edmund Husserl's phenomenology. Edmund Husserl of the crisis of European science and internal time consciousness. So I had studied with August Makunis in Athens, Ohio University, and continue to study with him and work with him in phenomenology and continue that interest. And then when I went to the University of Toronto, John O'Neill was a sociologist of the Merleau-Ponty variety out of France. I studied with Heinz Gadamer, who was a student of Heidegger's while I was up there. And I did stay with Marshall McLuhan, although that was an event unto itself, which is probably the time for another interview. But all of those combination of orientations pooled together to do work in communication. And I found myself, I had a PhD in communication, and I found myself at Ohio State University in the department, now the School of Communication at Ohio State. My original orientation into that field was actually I was hired to teach The philosophy of science was my first course. And I taught also an area called the psychology of the audience. And that school was a very interdisciplinary school. We had people from rhetoric, hardcore interpersonal quantitative researchers. We had mass media people. So it was a varied field. But as my interest progressed, my abiding interest was two things. One, theory. Two, methodology. I should say four. Topic areas, the issue of technology and its impact. And third was community social action research. How do you do research and also change the circumstances in which people live? And we have books out on all those topics. And so that was my foray into communication.
Thank you for your answer. And now let us talk a little bit about your newest book. Because you are, as I said already, you are the author or co-author of more than 30 monographs. And just recently, you wrote the new book together with your nice colleague, Professor Algis Mickūnas. And I know that it will be published very soon.
Yes.
Because I found it already. Some mentioning of it in the internet page of Bentham Books. Yeah?
Yes.
So my question is, or just two questions. What is this book about? And when will it be published? Because I'm eager to have it in my library, my personal library.
Well, let me first tell you about when it's going to be published. Actually, I just wrote a note this morning to the publisher and said, you told me it was supposed to be out by the end of September. In the Lithuania, it says it's October. Perhaps you have another month that's different than mine. And I have not I got a responses yet. I'm not quite sure now after mentioning that I'll get a response. But never, different place might be a different month. And we decided to go with Bentham. We had a couple other presses to go, but it's pretty much geared towards scientists, and that is the orientation. That is the audience for it, and it's open source, and we felt that would be the best place if we wanted the audience we wanted to touch. All right. Now, what the book is about. Well, it only took us 400 pages to tell people what it was about. And Vytis then asked a question, which I'm sure I have at least 3 minutes to tell you. The book is actually you may want to call it a philosophical question, but in one sense it really isn't. Maybe call it a phenomenological question, but what are the conditions for the possibility of artificial intelligence? What are the conditions that make it possible? Not whether it's necessarily good, bad. It's not a technical book on saying, here's the right codes, here's the right recipes, here's the right... That's not mine or Algis's orientation. Ours are a much broader question, one in which we, in writing the book, try to make people aware, scientists as well as students and faculty. What are the conditions that give birth to this? Not to go inside of it, per se, because even scientists may not even be aware of what they do. They may do it very well, but being aware of what they do and how they go at it often is a very passive way. It's almost like when you go to school and you learn an orientation of a particular way, and all of a sudden you don't think anything about it, you just deploy that orientation. But then somebody says, well, how did you get there? What are the foundations here? How did this arise? Because without knowing how they arose, you may never be able to, quote, modify it, change it, or if you will, keeping with the audience at hand, how might you be creatively able to transform what you do into something else if you don't understand from whence it came and what underlies these conditions? So the book is about what those conditions are. Now, the title, which I hope will help give you a feel for it, is The Critical Understanding of Artificial Intelligence. Its Phenomenological Foundations. That's the long title. And people say, that book would put me to sleep. And sometimes, given what we're writing, it put me to sleep too. But after a while, you get some new energy. You find out you read what you write afterwards, and it may not be so bad. And because one person asked me, well, on page 23 of this book, you said, and I said, I can't answer that question. And they said, why? I said, I wrote it, but I don't read it. And they thought that wasn't very funny. But most people don't read their books after they write them. So consequently, when you ask about a quote, they're going, yes, maybe. But in any case, I'm remembering this title because coming up with the title is critical. And the term critical understanding are not just something for the title. Those two words actually sort of undergird the whole book. And let me try to explain that now that I can have 3 more minutes. Okay. Even 6. See, Lithuania is a very generous place. So I like that very much. Critical is not here used in the pejorative term at all. This is not a brickbat on artificial intelligence. Most people think critical means complain or totally negative. It does not. It has been used that way, and often the only way used by some people, but that's not what it meant. To be critical of something is to be able to understand the limitations of something. What is the context in which it arises? One point. Number 2, what makes it possible? Number 3, what makes it probable? 4, what makes it even permissible? And finally, should you do it? Maybe even the more critical question. Because in the world of technology per se, and I don't want to indict every engineer, but I know many engineers and scientists and software, I do it because I can. That is not an example of a good ethical reason for doing something, especially in a world in which many of our greatest successes in science have been the greatest disasters. I didn't say that, by the way. A number of people have said that, from Albert Einstein to many others, with the arrival of the atomic bomb. So that consequently, and we've had a lot of disasters from technology. Now, not saying there hasn't been good consequence. I'm just saying that the end of the notion of critical, because you can, is that a sufficient reason to do it? Now you have to then look at the different scenarios. What are the risks? What are the, it's not even rewards. What are the risks? What can it do? Are trade-offs something that you in the Western world can make, but if it was in the Eastern world, are those trade-offs the same trade-offs you can make and say, this is good for us, that's bad, but we're willing to trade that good for that bad. Well, are other people in the world willing to trade that good for that bad? That's not an easy decision, and that's not an armchair decision. So critical is a very important word in this. Term understanding. One, certainly if education is anything, It's about coming to some understanding about what you're doing. An understanding is making conscious or aware of things. That's what understanding is supposed to do. You take a course in car mechanics. You expect to become aware of how the motor works, all right? That's expected. You take a course in logic. You expect to, quote, be able to do the logic and understand it. You expect to understand how to read blueprints. You understand the rules of a baseball game, the rules of a soccer match, to come to somewhat understanding. That's one issue of understanding. However, there's another notion of understanding, and that is coming to understand understanding. Now this is a little more tricky. Coming to understand understanding is a very, very difficult process. And I'm not going to make it less difficult probably now either. But if one comes to understand about understanding, then, and where we would get into AI, is understanding that our way about developing anything has a very primary levels of coming to found our habits. We are human first. And given the nature of what AI is, AI has been operating on the notion that they have a theory of the brain, or they think people operate the way a computer works. Well, that has actually been disproven by a lot of people in the brain area and in the people in neuroscience. I mean, so that is kind of very far off from where the world is now. Doesn't say that they are not somewhat trapped in that. But if indeed we come to understand how we work, then we might have an understanding of what the foundations are that gave birth to AI and what we think we can do with AI as opposed to not. Our humans operate on a very simple process. To see things, I have to move around. Things don't just hang out there on trees, and you want to see a point of view. A point of view, or if you will, a perspective, is an angle. Okay? We are living Euclidean space, we see this angle. We can move over here, we can see this angle. We move over here, we can see this angle. Now, strangely enough, guess what? I can even see that angle I don't see. It's absent. I don't have any doubt there's another side to this camera stand. Was that because I went through around the why am I not being fooled? It could be a fake. It could be even artificial, an artificial camera. How do I know that I see or possibly see that which is not there? It is because in the relationship to the world in which we engage, other things in our world help us see behind things. That's part of our world. That is part, actually, of classic Gestalt psychology. This is not new science in that respect, but it could be new for AI because computers can't see that which is absent. It sees the world of vision through the world of perspective, they claim. Even though the algorithms that fuel the artificial intelligence, those algorithms are, quote, flat. They don't have any thickness. They don't have any perspective. In fact, algorithms, by definition, refer to nothing empirical. That is why they function so well. It's like mathematics. Mathematics functions on nothing empirical. If I get and I count 3, I am using a base number system, and I'm grouping these 3 things here, but I could count 3 people, 3 matchsticks, 3 of anything. 3 has no empirical content. Neither does an algorithm. They are abstract recipes that fuel the computer to a particular task. Okay? Those recipes are recipes of saying, I can do this, and they are done typically what I will call in a propositional format. That propositional format is not poetic, by the way. Poetry is not part and parcel of IA. But I do that in a prescriptive domain, and I get people to do things. I can get any computer, and very well now, to do very concrete tasks. Do this, pick up that, does guaranteed. I can do those algorithms and now be able to get and take snapshots of different kinds of things and meld them together. Most of the world of AI is basically has really excelled at doing the visuals. Visuality is their strong suit. However, even in visuality, in the human world, one sees things, but at any given time, there's a background that helps you determine what this thing is. If you're an artist, you may see this plant is aesthetically very nice. As an agriculturist, I may think this is a pretty desperate plant. As one who is an aesthetician, I may say, yeah, nice, but the walls need a little help. This orientation is something in which I am bringing to it, but without that background, what I see is certainly a tree, and I can pick it up. But that doesn't tell me about, quote, it's a poetic function. It's aesthetic function. And so at this point, what AI is trying to do is determine, and probably rightfully so, are trying to determine how do you get these other sensory modalities embedded in these algorithms, these recipes, to be able to, quote, mimic human behavior. And if you will, how can they change in mid-air? For instance, in concrete orientation of face-to-face, many people behave in a reaction to something very quickly. It is not a proposition to go and do this. All of a sudden, you get caught in a fright. There's no proposition for your fright. It happens. The consequence, how do you do that? Animals react that way. All of a sudden they hear a noise. There is no proposition for it. Humans and animals also, if you will, interspecially react to each other. There is no program that's going to get and program that particular startle, the predator element that happens in that, quote, situation of here and now. Now, if it's a question of me, can I program this to get and search through all this data? Yes, I can do that. But you've got to remember, even self-learning systems are only as good as the programming. They still need the algorithms. Now, what about self-learning? Yes, self-learning. Now, is self-learning our third version of self-learning? The condition for self-learning means you have to be ready for it. Our human condition, if you're not ready to learn, you're not going to. Is that already embedded in AI? That if you're not willing to learn, can the AI program tell you if you're willing or not willing to learn? Or you just learn? Do you learn everything at once? What learning is being selected and deselected at the same time? It is not all-encompassing learning. I just learn everything that shoots out there. That isn't the case. And every AI programmer knows it's selectively this or that. It focuses on a domain and organizes itself around the domain. And it's still propositional language within a binary system. There's no doubt about that. Now, I could give you a scenario that would probably make you think I'm a little bit on the crazy side, but it's worth a risk. If you don't feel a little crazy, then you probably haven't said anything. From early Greek times and Chinese civilizations, the notion of automata, M-A-T-A, has been a fascination of how to breathe life into inanimate objects. Fast forward, that fascination took place in the area of alchemy. How do you make life out of elements? And it took place in some of the great literatures. Think of Frankenstein, how to breathe life into the inanimate object and to make it part of your own mime. Notice the Frankenstein, his animation, while there may have been life, is it life as you know it? And those areas of trying to breathe life, making things from inanimate into animate objects, have been a fascination throughout our ages. Now, that fascination of how you put life into something that's not animate, and to try to mime the human as human, has a great deal of also anthropological basis. If you read any books, and now even in quantum theory and quantum entanglement, you'll find out there is something called action at a distance. Action at a distance is part of quantum entanglement theory. What I do here happens there. That's quantum entanglement. Sometimes people call it life force. There's examples that if you boil eggs over here and there's eggs sitting over here, the eggs that are boiling generate a vibration in the eggs that are not. People have tried to call that life force. It's the same principle. Action here at a distance creates action here at the same time. The internet is based on that. What happens here happens there, and there here. That is called, historically, has been called the structure of magic. That's been magic. Now, you're saying, AI is magic? At base, yes. But so is quantum entanglement theory. So is action at a distance. This is a magical structure. Now, when I mean magic, let's be clear, all right? I could have used the word, this is called transformational awareness or magical awareness. It is a structure of behaving. It's a name given to a structure of behaving that has actually been part and parcel of what we've called historically telepathic. I mean, twins, right now, people understand that twins have some sort of vibration. They can feel at a distance what other twins might be undergoing. These are at the level of feelings, all right? Feelings are communicable. You've gone into places where the place is fraught with fright. The air is thick. The tension is high. Where did those feelings come from? And how is it that somebody else feels the tension as well as you? Did they drop out of the sign and said, I'm tension? No. Was it written on the wall, said this room is filled with tension? No. But it's communicable. Now, when I say magic, the reason why it's called magic is not because it is the mystical version of magic. It is magic because it has a root word, mag, M-A-G, which in Germanic language means power or transformation. So the consequence here is magic is a transformational structure of awareness. Not that it's, quote, a mystical kind of awareness. It is a process in which action at a distance is embodied within these areas that we may call artificial intelligence. One more point. We have had artificial intelligence for a long time, by the way, not just these little historical tidbits I gave you. But think about what it says. It's artificial intelligence. What is artificial intelligence? In many cases, it's both a process and a product that makes power, magic, making, and magic, same roots, making and magic, make knowledge. What does it mean to make knowledge? Well, any prosthetic that we humans engage in helps make some sort of knowledge through communication. Your phone is a prosthetic for your ear. I can talk to someone who's not here. Hearing aids are a prosthetic for your ear. They are not natural. Hearing aids are not natural. They are made. They are made by someone, and they embody knowledge. They are prosthetic. They are artificial in that respect. I put in glasses. What does it do? It's a prosthetic for my eyes, so I can see clearly. That is artificial, because artificial means it is not natural. Well, my glasses are not natural, but when they sit on my nose, they're extremely natural because I don't see the glasses, I see through them. When have we not had artificial intelligence? Now, the question then arises, why the big fuss? Well, the big fuss typically is artificial intelligence. Its biggest fuss is not so much when it does good. It's usually when it doesn't do good. One of the things of the biggest successes of the visualization of artificial intelligence has been the surveillance technology. And that is artificially recognizing people who they are by facial contours, eyes, except it doesn't do very well with gender or color of skin. Other than that, it's great. So there's just a lot of white people who end up by looking black through artificial intelligence and get recognized as black. Some women can't be recognized as men, or men recognized as women. So the reason is most of it is all programmed by white guys. So they program this based on, quote, features of, quote, that which they know. There is the human element here. It is still a program. And it creates all kinds of, quote, criminality that is not criminal. So there are some downsides of what it does, surveillance technology. Then what we do is we process all this data and we determine whether you're a good credit risk. In China, they have a social credit system based on AI. They track all your information and data as well as your facial recognition and all those kinds of things, put them together, and we can tell you if you're good credit risk or not. And you'll be, quote, labeled as such. Boy, can you imagine if they just changed the color of your skin and changed your gender, what that could do? and give you the correct name, our intelligence says, you're it. Well, that could be a problem. That's an ethical issue. That's not only a programming issue, there's an ethical issue. And the question is, should we be doing it? Don't know? Well, yeah, I think I know, but nevertheless, it is a decision. Now, the problem is, let's put it this way, ethicists, no, not saying they have an answer, aren't talking to the communication people. Communication people aren't talking to the engineers. The engineers don't talk to the biologists. The biologists don't talk to the neurophysiologists, who are basically up on what is and isn't the mind, the brain, and what goes on in communication. What's the background noise that helps you communicate at all? They don't talk to each other. And moreover, there's not many AIs that end up by, quote, assuming human posture and gait, is if human breathing so important to the way people respond to the world, the way people walk, their attitude, their rhythms, their posture, have a way of orienting themselves in the world. We don't have AI walking around. We have something called robots, but do they resemble anything like a human comportment or gait? Can AI robots dance? And how good are they? That should be the litmus test. If they can't dance to the music that's playing, that's not programmed, that's in their environment, they're not going to be able to mime human behavior. That is the challenge. That's almost 3 minutes or 6, I guess.
I think just 5.
Okay.
It was only 5.
Good. I feel much
So
better
thank
now.
you for this,
I'm glad I held to my time limits.
for this very laconic and short answer, which already answered some other questions which I prepared for you in advance. So thank you for answering all of them.
You probably didn't know that I could answer your question
Yes.
in one question.
Yeah. So your answer included answers to maybe 5 or 6 questions. Of course, all they were related to the topics, the thematics of your book. So now let us navigate a little bit through the pages of your book. I will not just quote this page number 23. No.
Oh, good.
That's a promise. But I found some interesting phrases, some interesting points in your book. And I was intrigued by one question which was posed in your book. How do we determine if a system understands? So this question leads me to a more fundamental question. Does the AI, does this artificial intelligence really understand? And if so, what does it understand? And what are the limits of such an understanding?
The short answer is AI, if it understands, has to understand a couple things. If it would have to understand itself, how it got to be that intelligence. And second, it would have to understand the observer of that intelligence, because you've got to remember, if you were engaged in communication, we should have somebody else out there cooperating. So the first step to understanding yourself is your relationship to other. So therefore, AI, unless it can understand itself in relationship to other, it can't understand itself. Now, could it ever? I think not, because it requires the, quote, AI to stand outside of itself and be its own observer. That is what humans can do. We call it reflection. Can AI reflect upon itself? Not the theoreticians of AI, but the AI itself. So the answer is no.
I presupposed such an answer. That means that I didn't have much time for reading your book, but that shows that I understood it in the right direction, because I presupposed your answer.
Oh, boy.
Thank you for just giving me some hope for
You have hope.
further understanding.
I don't know.
of
I
the-
didn't want to give you that
of your
much
book.
hope.
Okay, and one more interesting point which I found. So, chapter number 13, the last chapter,
Oh, the last chapter.
which is called The Radical Embodied Truths for Artificial Intelligence. And I just counted very accurately, and I found 29 these radical truths for artificial intelligence. So, what are the most fundamental truths out of them?
You,
2, 3, or 4?
2, 3, or 4.
Or 1?
See, but now he's asking me to remember what I wrote. You know that. However, the why there are. Let me first give you why there are, quote, 29 truths. It's not anything magic about 29. But what those truths are truths that are requirements for human awareness. And those requirements would be required of AI if AI were able to reflect upon themselves. I would say the greatest truth of them all, if I had to pick a truth out of the 29, which I had not counted before, and I'm not even too sure of the 29. There might be 28.5. And that is the condition of reflexivity. Not reflection, but reflexivity. The one that can take yourself as an object of inquiry. You can examine your past, you can examine your contemporary situation, you might even be able to anticipate your future. That all requires some sort of history of yourself, a present location, a present history, a living now, and an inkling of what could be tomorrow. Does AI have its own history? Does it have a living present, the way we have a living present? No. However, we do. And that is the condition in which we can make AI. So that, I would say, not that those other truths to be thrown away and this is the only, if it stands alone, no, it has to have the other ones to go along with it. But you will find fundamentally to all of those truths, they are a fundamental communication mechanism. Why? Because if we to broadly speak of communication, communication operates in, I would call, time, space orientations. There are different time and spaces one operates in different locales, that the things now that you do can be done other places and communicate with. So what we have is we do have now these prosthetics called internet that allow us to become universalized, something that we historically never had. The writing made us, quote, universal at one point, and oral communication did not, made us very localized. Writing expanded that. Now the internet and all our social media now become a total absolute mediated environment, which makes it more than universalized. So.
Okay, thank you for this answer. And now I would like to give you quite a philosophical question.
Oh, man.
Fundamental.
How do you know it's
concerning foundations. So there are quite a lot of books. Researchers made books written on the object of this artificial intelligence. But maybe it is for the first time that I had a possibility to read the book, which is also about artificial intelligence, but which focuses on the phenomenological or philosophical foundation of this interesting phenomenon. So why have you chosen this quite, let us say, unpopular aspect of this artificial intelligence? Because it's a great risk. Fundamentals, philosophical fundamentals. It's a great risk.
Well, it's a great, the funny part about it was, yes, when August and I were discussing AI, the fact of the matter is, I think basically my career has been one of risk. When I started out in the phenomenology of anything, it was controversial. My whole life as a graduate student was controversial because it was not the accepted orientation. And the more it became acceptable, the more we progressed beyond where it was. So it's always a risk to try to be a little bit out ahead of the curve. You're never sure you're totally ahead of it, but risk has been part of my modus operandi. So it wasn't a question of me or August even saying this is a risk. It was a version of let's do it and see what happens. It's you can't succeed unless you try to fail. And so consequently, we succeeded with a book to reach an audience who've yet to tell us it's bad, but the science people seem to like it, at least of the press. We did have a negative, not a negative review. We had a web review from another publisher, very big press, we turned them down. After I read the reviewer's review, I said, this guy has no idea what we're talking about, so we're not even going to do it, because he doesn't even understand, even though he said, yes, let's go ahead and publish it. I said, this guy doesn't even know. So the question is, when is a risk a risk? Well, the biggest risk is never taking it. If you think you got the intelligence to do it, and you think you can make it happen, then it's worth the risk. What's the worst that can happen? It reminds me of, I don't know how much people know about American League Baseball, that there was once a famous third baseman who prided himself on not making errors. When you see a ball was hit, American baseball, if the ball is hit at you, and you try to catch it, and if you don't catch it, they say that's an error. It's bad play. Guy goes to first base. So somebody said, how is it you don't make many errors? He said, you know why? Because if you don't try for the ball, you can't make an error. So he says, I just don't try for the hard ones. That's the bigger error. So.
Okay, thank you for this brave answer concerning risks. So I just had a look at the title of this publishing house, very interesting title, Bentham Books. And as far as we know quite well that this Seni Bentham is widely known in the philosophical world. It reminds me of Jeremy Bentham.
Yes.
And does the title of a publishing house, does it have something in common with this philosopher, or is it just a surname?
No, it's not. It is not. It is not with the philosophical Bentham. Actually, this publishing house and Bentham came about, and interesting story in itself. There was a professor who was writing his PhD in, I forgot exactly where, but and the topic, but what he couldn't find was research on his topic. It was very, very hard to find. And so apparently in his queries, his own personal queries, he was talking to people and they said, well, you know, the research is out there and what you need to find, but people aren't publishing it. So he decided to start once he finished his degree, a book series for scientists to be able to have, quote, research in areas that not normally would be published. So he found a niche for publishing the unpublishable, if you will, of that which can't make it into normal presses. Now, that is, by the way, in itself is a large topic, because presses are in the business of selling books. So the first thing they care about is it going to sell? The quality of the work isn't the issue. Is it going to sell? Second issue is, will we be able to get it by the reviewers? Well, the reviewers. So now we're going to select the reviewers. And we may select these reviewers on the basis to get the review, but we'll know they'll say no just because that's not their topic. So there's an interesting issue in the politics of journals and publishers. Right now, all due respect to Elsevier, they now own over 25% of the world book market in scholarly publications. They are the giant behemoth. They are the gatekeepers, essentially, of science around the world. So if they don't publish it, you're probably not going to find it. And this is not, and you have editorial boards usually of people who have been successfully publishing. Well, that means successfully understood as people who sell. So editorial boards are usually composed of people who have actually sold. So therefore, their orientations are not usually towards the new. They're towards the tried and true. So tried and true becomes the norm, not the exception. That's how the book company's Bentham was formulated.
So your answer just, how to say, gave me possibility to find some possible relations between Jeremy Bentham and this publishing house, because Jeremy Bentham was one of the main theorists of this utilitarian theory. He was speaking about the use and utility not for the person, but for the whole society. Yes. So this, I think this publishing house is doing a great job, because just it gives possibility for the books of certain type to be published.
Yes.
Yes, so they bring the great utility to the scientific society. So
yes,
there can be some relations.
There could be.
Okay, now maybe our mostly valuable audience would like to give some question, because we know, according to the Latin proverb, that vox populi, vox Dei, the voice of people is the voice of God. So please, maybe you can give us some questions.
And I don't want
feel yourself like gods.
Don't want any false gods before me.
Do you think that it is easy to publish a book if you have a clear idea in nowadays?
No. Clear ideas, no. Actually, right now, more and more is, and you'll know, you have to submit your curricula vitae with your book proposal. And I guarantee you the clear idea is going to be secondary to your curriculum vitae, which has all your credentials. Then it may help to have a clear idea. It's sort of like the American justice system. Yeah, it helps to be not guilty, but not necessary to be acquitted.
And about AI. All the topics that we were discussing kind of leads to the state that AI can't develop consciousness. Is it correct?
Correct.
And you like don't even see a possibility of that happening.
Correct.
Thank you.
Maybe some more questions from gods?
From the gods.
Okay, if I may then. Artificial intelligence has both its possibilities and threats, which is obvious and quite normal, I'd say. So my question would then probably revolve around the threats more than the possibilities. Do you personally see artificial intelligence, and we've spoken about before this discussion about the use of bots on social networks. So do you see artificial intelligence as the possibility to extend our limits, or do you see it more as a limitation which puts the boundaries that were designed by someone else?
Probably the short answer, at which I think I mentioned to you somewhat before, is both. And the reason is, let me give you, when we watch television news, those limits have already been enacted. You can watch, in the States, there are major news networks, and you will find differences between one against the other three. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, if I may, but the internet has been designed as this liberal place for all the ideas to be expressed.
Yes, that was yes, that was the perhaps, if you remember, by the way, it was advanced commercially as that, but in principle it was done for academic. It was invented for academics, by academics, to share research. When it got commercialized, people said, this allows everybody to have their voice. Well, yes, and that maybe is the problem. Everybody has the voice. Now, the idea is to try to capture other people's voices, and then, if you will, quote, socialize those voices into certain kinds of viewpoints. I'm not suggesting that that hasn't been happening in selecting certain books, selecting certain media of TV, radio. There's all kinds of points of view. What now has happened, though, that disinformation is now coming from so many directions. The choices have created a much narrower choicing by people. When you have a multitude, it's harder to choose. Do you ever go to a restaurant and see these big menus, and there must be 100 different things on there, and you're just bewildered. And finally, you say, I'm going to pick something that's familiar, because I don't want to spend all this time going through it. That's what people are doing. And they pick that who they share the most, quote, affinity to. Maybe it's the broadcaster, maybe it's the anchor, maybe it's the visuals, maybe it's the voice, maybe it's the politics, whatever the case. It is basically extending, but it can be dulling the inquiry. And that's probably the danger of, quote, our robust internet, is dulling the sensibilities to bigger things that are out there. Some networks will talk to you about, Fox Network, all they do is talk about the election that Trump lost. And what are they? Who are they catering to? It is a catering to a particular audience. They know who their audience is, and their audience is one that I would call, kind of an authoritarian audience. They want somebody who makes a decision, right or wrong, not a politician, quote, a businessman, doubts whether he's a businessman, like somebody who they say are like them, analogically like them, which means he has no problem with racism and he is permissible about it. He becomes the moral voice of permissive racism. Well, now they feel aid and comforted into it. So he stands for a lot of the things they believe but couldn't say before because they didn't think it was popular. What I call that, by the way, and there is a book, part of the book we're writing, the other book on power, is the history of resentment. Populations in the world today are pockets which we want to call the new right, or however you want to call them, authoritarian, are filled with resentment. And the resentment is a number of reasons. Trump happens to be just one figure which was able to embody those resentments. But to the degree that people are resentful of, then the filters or the other possibilities of how to expand your horizons, they don't happen. There was a journal out, a magazine, several years ago that I saw, which was still one of the better magazines that I've ever seen, pre-internet. It was called the Atlas World Review. And I don't think it's published anymore, at least if it has, I haven't seen it in many years. And there were it was a magazine, and it had stories from different parts of the world, okay? And then on that story, they would have news agencies and writers, and they would label them self-labeled, conservative, liberal, middle of the road, and they would give the viewpoint on that story, which I found enormously interesting because there were different points of view. Now, were they resentful points of view? No. They were actually thoughtful points of view, but from different points of perspective. Most of our, quote, internet now has found itself that it can find its space by creating political resentment, which is more anger, revenge, hostility. It is moodscaping through these kind of angry, resentful moments. That's what captures the audience. That is not any way to expand anything. So to the degree that we have more of that content, it will be less we will understand anything beyond that lens. And to the degree at one point that, quote, liberal media was doing that to capture advertisers because they need advertisers. So consequently, where the advertisers go, sometimes the networks also go that way because they need to be kept in business. And as we mentioned, there are a lot of people who are selling resentment who could care less, that don't need to make the money. They may be raving socialists for all I know, but they don't care. If they're making money, they're making money. So I think the politics of resentment right now are the content of many medias, and that is very limiting to any kind of extension or horizons of which people could be engaged.
When the Industrial Revolution has occurred, a lot of people lost their jobs in thousands, and the movement of Vytis have been founded. Do you think that when artificial intelligence revolution will happen, the same story will go on?
I think in some sectors, yes, in some sectors. I think The big boon in robotics, by the way, was actually stoked by COVID. And, you know, you kind of understand that. It's kind of, and quote, stoking robotic cars and, you know, people delivering meals and all. Seems like a decent thing. Job dislocation, I think could happen. The fact of the matter is, from what I read, the amount of money and resources it would take to dislocate the millions of workers in the world would cost infinitesimally more money than the whole world has. AI is very expensive. It also, in many cases, at least at this point, the use of cooling apparatus to cool and storage things is an enormous expense. The ability to get and use power. So AI is going to have to rely strangely on climate change, solar power, wind energy, even for it to try to maximize what it can do. Rest of it is going to be theoretical on paper. So I'm not quite sure it could get to that point. Will some sectors suffer? Yes, they are. Will some say? I think probably they're going to suffer in the hospitality industry to a degree. The other is potentially you create jobs because you're going to have thousands of people who are programmers and people who can run these things. I mean, so it's not like it's going to be people free. I think it's a question of, you know, of job selection right now and what the future brings. I think right now, in most cases, if you think of where we are, I mean, we got bots controlling our finance, but they make a hell of a lot of mistakes. We've got ways of breaking a lot of AI stuff. Professional cyber hackers can do that actually quite well. So, you know, for every danger, there's an opportunity, and for every opportunity, there's a danger. So I think that's the interesting balance that one always runs, regardless of whatever the technology is. There's never been a technology that has shown up that doesn't promise to eliminate the workforce. And there's never one that has done it. So, you know, it's, at least that's my thinking now.
Okay. So as we just know from the quite known song by Guns N' Roses, nothing lasts forever, even including this meeting. So in the name of all participants, of all these wonderful ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for this nice time which we had here together. And thank you for your book. And we will wait impatiently for the end of September in the USA.
Yeah, yes. Thank you very much. And thank you for the interview and the wonderful